Good evening, everyone. Welcome to RSA House and to everybody who's joining us online tonight. My name is Katrina Law and I lead the lifelong learning work for the RSA here. It's lovely to be here. I'm delighted to welcome tonight a conversation about tackling the NEET crisis. We turn our attention to that because we have a dreadful rise in the number of young people who are NEET in the UK, that is not in education, employment or training. To cut to the chase, nearly 1 million young people between the age of 16 and 24 are now classified as NEET for a variety of reasons and in different extremities in different parts of the UK. So we're going to be looking at the root causes of this, what's worked, what more we need to do. And on that basis, I'm delighted to be joined on the panel by Mo Isap, by Vicky Smith and Jay Dezem. Welcome. And Mo, could I turn to you, please? Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work in this area, please.
Thank you very much, Katrina. It's great to be back on Popular Demand. I did a gig like this in the summer. It was always good when you're invited back and said, Mo, you did a half-decent job. So it's great to be here and great to be amongst great people. My background is that I've spent the majority, if not all of my career, running my own businesses. I started in 95, 96, as soon as I left university. I've scaled a number of businesses in tech and I've failed a few. And presently my current business, which is hopefully my last business, I made a promise that I wouldn't go again, is very much to bring two worlds that I've been involved with over the last 30 years. Tech and the opportunities that tech bring, but from a human capital perspective, because about 20 years ago, I was involved in setting up a multi-academy trust, an education trust in my hometown of Blackburn, and since then we've scaled that trust to be one of the most successful. We've got 40 schools, nearly 35,000 young people in some of the most deprived parts of our country being given real opportunities to progress and prosper. So it's a coming of two worlds in what I do with Infor, and working across communities and places to look at the untapped talent in those communities and how we can give those talented people the visibility of the opportunities that technology and this exponential world that is now happening in front of our eyes has. And it has real prosperity opportunities, but the unfortunate thing is that it's very stratified, and there's a few who are making a lot of money and prospering. And the unfortunate thing about tech, it's a double-edged sword, that if you're not part of that, then you are going to suffer. Yeah. Because technology has a divisive element to it, and then you become subordinate to it, and that's the challenge. So that's what we're doing as Infor Group. So it's been a bit of a lifelong journey, and yeah, happy to have that conversation with everyone today.
Thank you, Mo. Vicky.
Thank you. Really pleased to be here. I'm Vicky Smith and I work for a company called the Education and Training Foundation, and we're a charity that supports those who work across the further education and skills sector, and supports the leaders of those institutions, but also those that do the education of the young people and all of the learners, actually, because it's not just young people who learn in colleges and training providers. Learners can be 14 up to 104. And at ETF, we're the professional body. We are focused on the professionalisation of the sector, supporting teachers so that the teaching experience is positive for the learner, and ergo the learner outcomes improve. So that they can go on to live fulfilling lives, whatever that might mean for them. We are the holder of professional standards in the sector, and we have a number of statuses that recognise the quality teaching that does take place in the sector. We're also trying really hard to help, and I'd say it's the nation, better understand the work of the further education and skills sector. When you have decision makers who have experienced a track of education, so they have perhaps gone into school, they've gone on to sixth forms and onto universities, and haven't had a touch point with further education and skills, it's very hard for them to conceive how different it might be and why the pedagogy, why the teaching and the learning is different. And so we're working really hard to do that. And I have to say, we were really pleased with some of the mentions in the Prime Minister's speech last week, because the ETF has been calling for a workforce strategy for the sector. And I think we're the only body that has it, and it featured. So our message is getting out there. Why the sector is important and why it's important for this debate. Further education and skills teaches a higher proportion of learners with special educational needs and disabilities than any other part of the education sector. When you think about learners being from 14 to 104, you don't just have captive cohorts. Everyone can come in, and they come with their attributes. It's you know, so and that can really magnify the numbers. They also support a greater number of learners from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds, and that's a challenge. And you know, they're not going sort of automatically into your high-powered jobs straight onto sixth form, A-levels and universities. Some of them, their families may have a history of not engaging with education and not engaging with employment. And that's the role model that they faced. They're also likely to balance care responsibilities, employment or health challenges, all of this on top of trying to deal with the pace of change that we're experiencing at the moment. So the further education and skills sector is the place that can capture and provide a really safe place for learners who have perhaps switched off from previous education experiences. Make this personal. I was one of those individuals back in the day, and education gave me my life chance, and that's become my platform, I think. Thank you.
Thank you for that context. And Jade.
Yes, hi, I'm Jade Azim. I'm Head of Policy and Advocacy at the Good Growth Foundation. Before I go on to what we are and who we are, my background's primarily in politics and in policy, including having worked for the now Culture Secretary, so it's very nice to be here at the RSA. And through a myriad of terrible decisions, ended up in various guises in Westminster. And I suppose politics has not quite kept up with the NEET crisis. And at the Good Growth Foundation, we do a lot of work on skills and training. For those that don't know who we are, fair enough, we're actually a relatively new think tank. We look at essentially economic growth in the most inclusive sense. So we don't see it as just numbers on a chart. In fact, one of our swing voters in a focus group asked at one point, when we discussed what about being the highest growing economy in the G7, he said, are we even in the G7? There is a significant gap in the way that policy makers talk about economic growth in this country. And actually, when we polled it, it wasn't about the national economy, it wasn't about GDP figures. Actually, the first and foremost, when people asked what they saw as pivotal for growth in this country was skills reform. 82% picked it as their top, when asked to rank their top measure for what they see as palpable growth. So that's good colleges, good opportunities to retrain and upskill. And again, I think it's, and we'll go on to a little bit on sort of where skills policy is today, but we are hoping, and actually we've been speaking about this, Vicky and myself, we've got a new research paper coming up very soon on sort of what skills reform looks like on the ground and what people expect to see from skills reform. It's been good to hear good soundings from the government, but obviously we're at a pivotal moment in time. And politically, it's also significant and important for the government in that if they get skills reform right, there is a chance, for example, to fend off the populist right. And I suppose just to, if we're going to go personal, I always, it's important for me, this issue, and the whole agenda of good growth, as it were. I always think back to being a kid. I grew up in East London and seeing Canary Wharf off into the distance. And I always see it as this sort of paradox, the Canary Wharf paradox of, you know, good growth is right there, but I didn't have the right skills and training at the time. My school wasn't equipped for me to be able to enter those revolving doors of the financial sector. Booming as it wasn't growth that incorporated me and my community. And so it's as personal a mission as it is my job that we get the skills crisis and the NEET crisis right.
Thank you. Mo, can I ask you please, you've talked about the tech industry particularly, and could you please expand on how you have involved people in the tech industry and how you think similar employers could grasp this as part of the NEET challenge?
Yeah, I think before I think one of the things, everything comes down to accountability, and a lot of times is, you know, who's accountable for this? You know, is it the employer who's not giving jobs to these young people or people in those settings? Is it the education system that's not really working for them? Is it the politicians who are not making the right decisions? I think the problem we have at the moment is that everybody has the good intention, but everybody then is not able to make a difference. And it's a frustration. You know, you don't speak to any employer. No, you go into becoming an entrepreneur because you can give people opportunities. You know, similar to many of us here, I couldn't have imagined in my lifetime, I've been in now this world of entrepreneurship, I've probably employed nearly 4,000 people directly. You know, my yearhead in school said that I'd be a taxi driver, and that was it. So the reality is you don't go into creating businesses or becoming employers not to employ. It doesn't work, and the real satisfaction you get is that you give people opportunities which may not be present, especially if you come from places of disadvantage. You're more focused to want to give those opportunities. But if I set the sort of scene as I see it, and as a person who is not political, or I just see it and say it as it is, I think we have a number of problems which are not ones that we can tinker around. We either take a nuclear approach or we just forget. Because ultimately this tinkering is actually exacerbating the problem. Because ultimately we're creating a scenario where everybody thinks that they're going to make a difference, but you're going to make it worse. So you've got to go back to the sort of root of where the problem is. We have an education system from, you know, the age of 4 to the age of, you know, 18 to that extent, which was actually created to colonialize the world. And it still is the case. And, you know, you're still teaching young people in the way that that was set up to do. A number of administrators, and 200 would run a country of 2 billion, and that was the mission. Write and read and, you know, do what you are able to, and that's how you know, do what you do. And it's a Victorian system that is not fit for purpose. And I'll be honest with you, this is why it's failing so many young people today. And that goes across the piece. And where, you know, the further education world has a part to play, its part to play in the place is to meet the labor demands of that particular place. But unfortunately, again, through policy, you know, mishaps, colleges have become businesses. And they have to afford themselves, so they have to go where there's money. And that is not conducive to actually helping the most disadvantaged, because their decision making is based on getting, you know, revenue in from programs that may not be the right programs, but they have to afford themselves. So a principal and a chief exec now of a college group is making decisions not on the basis of what does my community need or how do I work with my employers to create a real transition, but how do I afford myself? And universities have become sausage factories. And ultimately, unfortunately, rather than preparing, you know, robust and confident and resilient and broad-minded young people, they are again driven to some extent commercially. And those young people are coming out at the cliff edge. And all of these transition points are exacerbating the problem. And that can't be just tinkered around with unless you redesign the scenario. And then you go to the perspective of the person and the family and the parent. And some of you, we at Star Academies have been doing a piece of work with Public First, and now, Bridget Phillipson has taken it up around the white working class. And why is it that the white working class is underachieving? And we've just published it, and you can find it on the Public First website, yesterday midnight. It was appalling about 2,000 young people, 2,000 parents, 500 educationalists, about what are the reasons why today, and if you look at the NEET percentages, why is it that white working class children, particularly boys, are massively underachieving in comparison to middle class white kids and middle class ethnic kids? And if you look at the status on the percentages of the 15%, I mean, you break it down, certain demographics, certain groups are worse off in this context. And it's startling. And one of the sort of questions was, what is the parents' view on education? Well, the reality is that 50% of those parents said that education didn't serve them. So the apathy, the disconnect between what education has value for is missing. So are they going to instill that in their children, or are they going to be apathetic about the fact that this is a system that's not for us? And it's failed me, it failed your grandparents, so ultimately, it's going to fail you. So why bother? And if you do not put that meritocracy or value to education, as many migrant families put and say, well, look, we don't want you to take a part-time job like my dad did, and I wanted to work part-time because I get some cash. And he said, no, you're not going to work part-time, you're going to study. Because I've not given up my teaching career to work 12 hours in a factory for you to work in McDonald's. And that's the reality. And many migrant families are seeing the results of that approach. But if you look at indigenous populations, and we have schools in Blackpool, in Baycup, in really 3 generations of worthlessness and worklessness, how are you going to fix that problem? Because, I'll give you an anecdote. I've got a school in Baycup, and we had a trust meeting. And one of our senior leaders said, can I give you an anecdote about a phone call that the school received about a young person from the parent? And the parent rang up and said, Tommy won't be in school today because he's collecting the hay. And that's the reality. That here is a parent who says, well, collect the hay because education really doesn't serve us in this way. So there's a disconnect there. There's also a disconnect in the reality of how that person or that young person believes that the education system is serving them. If they are disconnected from that learning environment, if they're not getting the joy, and a lot of the white working class kids are saying that we don't enjoy school, more in comparison to middle class kids. So if you don't enjoy your learning, if you don't get that sort of connection to learning, what are you going to do? And especially when you're around areas where there are other things that will pull you away from that. And lastly, the pathways to success. Many of those young people do not see grades and university as a route to success. They don't. They say, well, I might get a trade. Or if the trade's not there, then I don't know. And the reality is this, and the reality continues and continues. And unless we change this scenario from bottom up, employers can't fix it. Employers can create growth. Employers can create opportunities. And those are things that then need to be connected into the place. And those employers need to actually be able to contribute to the education system. These are just silos at the moment. We're living in a stratified world. And unfortunately, the more disadvantaged you are, and when you look at the economic, and I'll talk to you about another transition point, the final transition point, and we see this, because I put 4,000 people who were of a profile of unemployed or underemployed into jobs in my business currently. And those are 4,000 young people, predominantly young people, who for 6 months after graduation couldn't get a job. Their master's degree, couldn't get a job. I had given up. Mentally shot on a cliff edge. And the stats say that if after 6 months you don't find the job, you're going to be forever underemployed. And there are stats right now, and it was published in the Times recently, where they said some degrees, Some students are earning £17,000 after 5 years from graduation. But if you went to Oxford, you're earning 90,000. That's the disconnect. And that's the reality. And if you are then in that transition point at 22, and you've done all that work, I bumped into a girl who's just graduated. My office in Media City is, next to Salford University. A girl comes with a parent to actually graduate, and she says, I bumped into her in a lift going up, and I said, whoa, what an amazing day, you should be so proud. First generation family, you could tell mum was first generation, and straight away she said, well, it was a waste of time. I said, you just graduated. She goes, I'm not going to get a job. That's the reality. Now, if that's the starting point, then they're going to be NEET. And they're going to be NEET, not unemployed NEET, economically inactive, because you give up. And the mental strain, and today we are suffering. Our young people are suffering. I see it every day. These young people have lost hope, lost courage. They do not see a future that is bright and should be amazing for them. They are just seeing doors that are closed to them. And unless we fix this, unless we start to look at the root cause of why this is happening, and I say for 1 minute, the tech world has opportunities, immense opportunities. This is a generation of natives who could do so much, but unfortunately there's a disconnect in what education is empowering them to do, because the education is still talking about chalk and blackboards. And every part of that education system is behind the curve. And as an employer, I would just look to put a nuclear charger behind it and just start again. That's the reality. Because that's what we do in business. If something's not working, we don't just tinker with it. We say, let's go back to the drawing board and let's fix it. Because unless we do that, there's no safety net for us. And the unfortunate thing is, there may be a safety net for the politicians, there may be a safety net for the principal in that school, but there's no safety net for that young person. And we do not have a safety net in this country. We are actually failing our people. And that's the stark reality.
Thank you. Very interesting you talk about the transitions side of things. We hear that a lot. We also hear as well that employers don't understand qualifications necessarily that people are coming out with, because we have a plethora of different types of qualifications in this country as well. People can't make sense of them for themselves. Vicky, you're right in this heart of this transition point, really, dealing with so many people in this critical phase in post-16 in FE.
Yep.
How are you working in the system that we can't nuclear charge and take away, within the system that you've got? What are you doing, and how are you enabling people and identifying people at risk to stop them from falling through the cracks?
First off, my entry point to responding is to pick up on something Mo said. Your father gave up a job as a teacher to work in a factory 12 hours a day. Teachers who work in further education are paid more than 10% less than school teachers. They may be an already fully qualified engineer, plumber, chef, hairdresser. Education generally has a recruitment and retention problem. In the further education and skill space, it's even worse, because you can earn more money working in your primary professional identity than you can as an educator, which is a real problem. How on earth do we attract these people when we also need these people, these teachers, these educators, to be so impassioned that they can inspire and motivate the learners who have been, who have disengaged, who have been switched off from education, who cannot see the reason. If we can't find educators who can really turn the dial and talk to learners in a manner that works for them, in a modality that works for them as well, and whether that's using AI and engaging with them and teaching using all of the methodologies that are open to us, then we've got a problem. So what we try and do, and we historically, Education Training Foundation has been the body that has worked with government to train in the new curricula. So when a new program comes along, whether it's T-levels, which you might have heard about, whether it's refocus on apprenticeships and so on, we then upskill those educators to try and ensure that they can ensure that the learner experience is positive and gets the positive outcome. There's then the question about actually curriculum design as well, and whether that's fit for purpose. Do employers know about T-levels? Is it working for them? T-levels were conceived to be a route to employment, for example. To date, most T-level students have gone on to university. So, you know, kind of, have we created the right conditions for technical and vocational qualifications? It'd be really interesting, and Jade, you might have a take on the curriculum and assessment review that's pending, and you know, kind of in the political autumn that we're waiting for, because that will help shape the future of technical and vocational education. I'd also add that Jackie Smith has focused on technical and vocational education, and I put it front and centre. This is great. She's talking about 60% of technical skills being delivered by universities. They will be the higher technical skills. Actually, if we're talking about NEET and those who have disengaged from education, we're not talking about higher technical education. We're talking about entry-level qualifications. We're talking about qualifications at level 1 and level 2, where we can get people back into society and to becoming more active in their communities. Universities aren't going to be the places for those. It will be the colleges, it will be the training providers, it will be the apprenticeship providers and so on. And how do we make those attractive when they are likely to be offering minimum wage, all consuming in terms of hours that you have to work, balancing that with all of the needs that we spoke about earlier, and trying to balance life when it feels done to. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it's good. I have so much respect. I can say, if we're bringing in things about our own families, my dad was a bricklayer, and my dad taught in FE college in the evening to supplement his work. And he was really, really proud of doing that work. So I hope he instilled that, but it's a really interesting issue there. Why would how do you instill that enthusiasm for something that's not really going to pay you well necessarily, and make you satisfied in your life? So Jade, it's a massively complex problem. Many sectors involved in all of this. In your experience then, and what do you think a joined up national strategy should look like to really help us deal with this and to try and stop this rising trend in NEET?
Just a little question, yes. I was nodding furious at both of you and your stories, but something about what Vicky just said about the way that we talk about qualifications. Actually, we've done a lot of polling on this, and when you ask people what they think about why they would do a qualification, why they would do training, it's not necessarily the paper you get at the end. At the end of the day, people want a secure, high-paid, high-skilled job that keeps food on the table for their families. And it was very good to see that skills actually moved from the DFE to DWP, and in our view, that was a good thing. It was an acknowledgement that skills and education doesn't exist in its own silo. It is, in fact, the cornerstone of everything the government wants to achieve. We need to make sure that skills policy and training is at the very heart of everything the government talks about, that all policy comes back to skills, that it is the horse pulling the cart, essentially. So if you look at, for instance, the industrial strategy, and you look at the IS 8, those critical sectors that the government identified, they are also the ones that have the largest skills gap. That prevents a significant challenge for the economy at large, but also, why are we not training up enough people to fill those gaps? There is a huge opportunity here where we've got these emerging sectors where actually, if you tie them back to our great FE colleges or the opportunities that the new growth and skills levy potentially puts to us, that you could actually, with highly targeted interventions, get a lot of NEET, a lot of people currently NEET, into those sectors. to give you an example, the government's doing this major infrastructure push across all sectors, across whether it's transport, whether it's new reservoirs, whether it's 1.5 million homes that we have to build to fulfill demand. Can good training opportunities and jobs be created through that? There are fantastic opportunities across the private sector. Actually, the private sector is leading the way in terms of house building, for example, where they have been pushing, rightly so, and thankfully it has come about, for the Growth and Skills Levy to dedicate a portion of its funding to flexible courses. So instead, just apprenticeships, which are very important, 50% will also go to immersive short courses that get people involved and immediately into those very urgent skills gaps. The bricklayers, you know, people that are absolutely integral to actually seeing economic growth founded in this country. I think the 1.5 million homes are not going to be delivered unless we find the people to build them. And that presents a challenge, but as I said, a policy opportunity, but also a political opportunity, right? If you can talk about Heathrow, the runway free at Heathrow, of its own accord, on its own, it's great for us wonks who love a good plane, you know. But if you don't relate it back to people's lives, they're not going to be particularly grateful for it. If you can talk about the potential jobs that comes about through that, not just the direct jobs that actually go into building that runway, but potentially the local infrastructure, you know, the new reservoirs that have to be built to support new towns, for example. All of this presents a massive skills gap, but also with the right interventions, with the right funding, with the right direction of the curriculum, away from just, and academics are very important, but away from just academic, to thinking about the very immersive needs of the IS8, of these new infrastructure projects, and you link up the two in a very joined up way, not in a silo, but having skills as the precursor to everything that we talk about, skills reform to everything we talk about. Then you might come to a solution where actually you've got good economic growth and you've employed a lot of people. And that in part also helps meet the challenge of economic inactivity. You know, you can reduce in the longer term the welfare bill if you've also joined up your skills approach to the industrial strategy. So there's plenty of different things on paper that the government's doing, but actually if you look at it foundationally, everything comes back to skills and everything comes back to ensuring that our people are trained up and that we are putting as much money into skills investment. And one of the things that we will be pushing for is for the OBR to consider skills as a major driver of growth, so that there is also political will to push for that. And there's plenty of evidence that it does drive productivity, that a lot of skills investment can actually, in the end, not just create jobs, but create new infrastructure, create the new homes that you see, the new reservoirs that will come about. So a lot of fantastic stuff is happening, and a lot of noise being made is fantastic. It's just making sure that skills now being in the DWP, there is a common thread through every bit of comms that's coming out of government, that skills isn't just the add-on, the nice to have, it's actually the first point at which we speak about everything.
Can I come in on that one? Just a very quick point. What's really important in that is the ISA, the industry areas, the focal points, also happen to correlate with where we have teacher shortages. So actually to get the people to build the houses, to create the reservoirs, we need to take a step down that value chain a little to say, have we got the people who can train the people who can become this workforce of tomorrow? And that needs to be front and centre in this conversation. Sorry.
No, it's good. Mo, can I just ask you, if we find that perfect storm in an area, and Vicky's found the teachers that can come in and can train, and we know that there's those skills, how do we reach the people that are the hardest to reach, who are out of the system, who are NEET but are not claiming, and how do we get to them, in your experience?
Well, I think every community is a community. Ultimately, these people exist in communities. Where we have a problem in society as a whole, we have become more and more stratified. We have become, the Royal Society of Arts is stratified. Let's be clear. Our algorithms are stratifying us. I remember the day when my dad was in his factory. He would go to the supermarket and he would meet his foreman and they'd have a good chat. This was white collar, blue collar conversation. I didn't know. In his broken English and, all of that. You don't have that today. The people who are in those executive roles and those people who are doing those low-skilled jobs, they don't meet, they don't converse, they don't go to each other's birthday parties and restaurants and wherever we are. But that's the reality, that when people say, and I do a lot of these talks, and I work, in Salford, which is one of the, it's the 9th most deprived. I mean, it's a bit of a, it's just an absolute paradoxical sort of, situation where you've got, my headquarters is Media City, which is probably the largest economic cluster outside of London as a hub. And then Salford, where it exists, is the 9th most deprived council. And there was a sort of a polling done with young people who live in the surrounding area in Odsall. I mean, we switch on our BBC Breakfast News and we see this sort of skyline of Media City. That's where my headquarters is. These kids will draw the curtain and see that. And the polling said that there were some young people said that they believe that you have to buy a ticket to come there. This is Salfordians, born and bred, who could see Media City there, as you've heard. So the reality is that we live in a very, very stratified world. People don't interact. People don't see opportunity. Because if you have opportunity, you move out of the town or you move out of the area. And you don't come back, do you? And if you don't come back, how are you going to instill that aspiration and that belief that this is something you could do? Because what you say is, I made it despite growing up in this place.
Yeah.
You have to change that key phrase. I made it because I am from this place. Mm-hmm. More and more of us need to stay in our homesteads. Just because you can afford that nice 5-bedroom house with a double garage, with a nice development in that leafy area of, we were talking about Yorkshire becoming gentrified. I mean, last of the summer fine would never exist if Nora would turn in her grave if we were to see the house prices that are now being paid for her 2 up, 2 down, terraced. But the reality is this, and unless and until we who have the ability actually serve our communities and allow those communities to see, they will forever say, this ain't for us. Your grandparents will say this ain't for us. Your parents will say this ain't for us. And that young person will believe this. So then that young person does not only believe in this not being for them, they will rebel. They will repel. They will feel hard done by. They will then be prejudiced. They will then go in the hands of those people who will then indoctrinate them to believe a certain narrative about how their community and their selves are being left behind. And that's the reality. And that's when you speak to those young people, and when they're on their e-bikes and their scooters, and when I drive into Salford in Media City, they're there in their black hoodies. And I feel that this is the generation that is actually in front of a mega opportunity, which today that young person, if you speak to them, will say to you, well, that's not for me, is it? And I'm not going to be working in a coffee shop, because that's what you think I'm going to do. The reality is aspiration. The reality is role models. The reality is actually people showing that this is for you. And unless we break these stratified, we live in our own bubbles, we send our kids to the schools that we want them to go to, because, why do you send them to that school? Because the kids are all from a similar demographic. Why do you send them to that sort of place, after school club? The majority of white working class kids don't do after school clubs. They don't do sport. They don't do music. They have no additional experience of culture, of life beyond the classroom. How do you expect them to believe in value, believe in the place, believe in, all right, if you want to be a bricklayer, you want to be a bricklayer because you want to build something in your place, not break it, not rob it, not graffiti the wall. But how are you going to instill that value? How are you going to instill the pride that you should have to look after your place? By giving them those experiences to believe that you belong here. That belonging doesn't exist. Because what they see is that we don't belong. We don't have this level of the similar opportunity. We don't have the same status. These people belong. And we are all culpable. And in our own worlds, with our algorithms, we even have dating apps that just, connect us with the same type of people. It's true. You go to restaurants with people that are of our similar earning. We choose to be with people with a similar earning and socioeconomic grouping. How often? There was a time where that wasn't there. That people who worked on the shop floor and worked in the offices were friends, were neighbors, could afford to live next to each other. Can you do that now? All of those people are marginalized, dependent on council housing, dependent on those houses. But they used to be able to afford the same houses that their grandparents lived in. These are those places, whether you're talking about Salford, or whether you're talking about Blackburn, or any other borough and authority in these places where you see a generational deprivation. And we're at fault because we've moved out and we don't go back. I read my daughter's yearbook, end of yearbook, and she goes to one of my top schools, which is the best school in the country, Tiggs. And she wrote, the question was, where do you want to be in 10 years' time? And the answer was, as far away from here as possible. That's an indictment. People will succeed if they believe and they connect and they have a belonging and they have a value. You can have the best qualifications. Look, the reality is this, and I say this all the time to even my staff. Nobody washes a hired car. Too often, job opportunities, councils, local authorities, we're going to build this entire building and we're going to have jobs and everything else. Let's be honest, the people who built it, carpet-bagged. They came and took the money and they left. The people on the ground didn't get the opportunity. And then those houses they couldn't even afford. Nobody washes a hired car. People come and carpet-bag these places. These places are disadvantaged because people have come and made promises to invest and they have taken rather than given. And all this sort of superficial stuff to say, yeah, we've done some apprenticeships and we're giving some opportunities. That's all superficial. That's not real. Instill the pride and the value of the people of that community. Give them and empower them and make them believe. Make the parents believe that you're from Blackpool. There are kids in my school in Blackpool that have not gone to the beach, not been on a train. Take them to the Manchester Science Museum. That young woman, that single parent who says to me, I've bought my child £200 trainers and she's on benefits. Why has she bought that kid £200 trainers? Because mom wants the best for the kid, and that's the only way she knows what best is. Show her that taking the kid on a train to the Manchester Science Museum or the Natural History Museum or to this place and that place will be more beneficial, which is best for that child. If a parent doesn't know what other best they can give the child will only receive what they believe to be the best, and that's how that future is translated. So my answer to that question, sorry for Gary going on, is the fact that absolutely you can have all the policies in the world, but to fundamental, the belonging and the value to the place and that community must exist. And unless you do that, you are just skirting around the edges because those communities are going inward.
Thank you, Mo. I'd say that resonates heavily with the social connections work at the RSA and really speaks to the heart of that. I must ask us now to have short answers because we have quite a lot of questions coming in online and we would like to take some questions from the room. But I would just like to ask Vicky, because we talked about this a little outside, a subject close to my heart. We know, just to change tack completely here, that people with disabilities are massively overrepresented in the NEET population. And I wondered if, Vicky, you could briefly explain how we could positively encourage more take-up and participation in internships, working experience, and the FE experience more generally in that group.
Yeah, there was a report out earlier this year from a group called Impetus, and they said that I think it's sort of like 80% of those that are identified as NEET also have special educational needs and disabilities. That's absolutely unacceptable because they're already disadvantaged in terms of low qualifications, employment opportunities, health issues. So we're piling on disadvantage upon disadvantage upon disadvantage and making them further away from the communities that could offer them a safety net. And the number, so not only have NEET's numbers risen, the number of those with special educational needs and disabilities has also risen sharply. In 2019 it was 7.9%, 2022 it was at 12.3%, and we've got some localities now where it's 1 in 5 learners, and that is significant. How on earth do we create an environment, a learning environment that makes for that sense of belonging, culture, and safety? Some of our wonderful general further education colleges up and down the country actually put kindness at the heart, trying to resolve some of these issues and change the dial so that we can bring young learners in, as well as having to be really phenomenal businesses that are connected to health, to policing, to local authority networks, housing, etc. Having those represented in the college, so they're hearing all of the issues, because NEET isn't a single, there isn't a single solution, and the same is true for special educational needs and disabilities. But those two things are closely correlated, and actually we need to give people an entry point, and I would contend that that's further education that is the entry point and a way back into society and community. The policy link, I think, is we've got in health, we're talking about neighbourhoods. In education, we're talking about place-based delivery, and locating it so it's responsive. Just need to make sure that health and the education, etc., also connect in that place space.
100%.
Thank you. I just have one short question for you, Jay, before we move to questions in the room, if I may. If you could describe one opportunity that every young person under the age of 18 should have that would prevent them from becoming NEET, what do you think that would be?
Seeing someone from their background succeed in something that they don't think they can do. One of the, sorry, very short. One of the things I noticed between myself in a state school and the privately educated kids that I met at university was that they talked at length about all of these career fairs that would come into their schools, and they would see people and be able to speak to employers that were much like them, much sounded like them. And that aspect of education just didn't, certainly during the austerity years, just was not an option at my state school. So I did not get the opportunity to see and hear from people that looked and sounded like me, being high flyers. I was very fortunate in well, it's terrible to say, but escaping the poverty that often plagued many people in my community. But that was an exception. Being able to see kids like yourself doing well, and that is an intervention that can be made by the schools that struggle, but by other employers, by private schools in the local areas, by sharing resource in the community to make sure that they are exposed to alumni who are doing well, that sound and look like them.
Brilliant. I couldn't agree more. Thank you. We have got time for some questions in the room now, please. So my colleague Grizz has a mic. So we've got a few hands up here. Can we take the gentleman just next to you, please, Grizz, his hand up first. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a governor for a special school for young people with moderate learning difficulties. They are not going to be part of the 60% or 75% or whatever the government's target is for graduates. So they are not going to be unemployed with a lower third in basket weaving. The other question is, and these are politicians who have gone through, they've gone to university, they've got their PPE, they've gone through all the conventions, and as one of the speakers said, they don't know what it's like in the other part of the sector. The second part is picking up on Mo's comment about entry-level IT jobs. And again, I had problems with my broadband, and I phoned BT, and I got through to a call centre in Bombay. And again, I just wonder whether one way in which we could do it would be if we had government policy which, instead of putting taxes on jobs, whether we actually tried to re-import some of those entry-level jobs into the UK and maybe put a tax equivalent to national insurance or whatever on the jobs that we outsource.
Thank you. We're going to take a couple and then we'll come back to them. This lady at the front, please. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Smith, you mentioned in passing young people with caring responsibilities, and I'd like to kind of draw that out a bit and say that young carers in the UK are 32.9% more likely to be NEETs as opposed to 5.3% of the general young person cohort, and that about 40% of registered carers, young carers, will be NEETs for more than 18 months, apart from the awful and unacceptable price paid by those young people. It's a terrible loss to the community, and what should be done about it?
Okay, and we'll just take one more, please, from this side of the room. This gentleman at the front here. Thank you.
Hi. I guess one of the most pressing questions is, at which point was it decided that young person meant 16 to 24? Because it seems to be changing in terms of like, it's now like 35, depending on where you are, depending on what the initiative is, whether it's funding for young people or whether it's a course for young people. The age seems to be moving. That's one thing. But also, what's also kind of not really been spoken about, being that we're in the Royal Society of Arts, is the creative industries. Also, it's kind of just not been mentioned at all in terms of like what the opportunities are in the creative industries, and also that in itself speaks to seems to be an afterthought a lot of the time, when really it leads innovation, it leads industry, it leads, you know, the tech industry, as you mentioned, in terms of creating new ideas, new products. Somebody's going to have to design those houses that someone's going to have to then lay bricks for at some point. Those are also skills that get overlooked in terms of what young people want to maybe aspire to be architects and not just bricklayers. There needs to be more inclusive conversation in that regard as well.
Yeah, thank you. Could we have short answers, please, on account of the time? Vicky or...
Yeah, if I can take that. It's a very important question.
Okay.
And if you ask me the question that you asked Jade, to say what one thing that I would do, and in the same vein as the gentleman at the front, we as a company work with those creatives who are at risk of NEET and make them freelancers and give them the opportunity to actually have a market that they can offer their services to. But here's the thing. Every government department is talking about digital transformation. Every government department is saying AI is the future. That's how we're going to do productivity, whether it's the police, whether it's the NHS, So why don't we do this? Why don't we create a national tech service at 16? For those young people who are leaving school and have risk Let's put them in for 2 years on an apprenticeship, serving the local authority, the police, the NHS, to work as digital natives. Why don't you use the power they have? And that includes creativity, because these young people not only are good with tech, just on the technology, they're good with it, with creativity. Look at the content creators and all the sort of TikTok. Well, get them to promote that initiative that you're trying to sell as a public service. For 2 years, get them working for the public. Because what that will do is, one, you'll give them a proper understanding of job and a high-skilled job, but a connection to the place. You've done something for your place. And even at 21, those graduates who don't get in there, give them the same opportunity. For 2 years, give them a graduate job in that space with a local public sector organization. They are squandering millions with consultants who are telling them things that are absolute bullshit. You know, the Saudis, I have a business in Saudi. The Saudis have kicked out the top 4 consultancies because all they've done is given them a 200 PowerPoint and charged them £1 million for it. These young people will tell you what to do, how to use AI, how to use creative content to promote that initiative, or for that local authority to sell its services to the community. That's what we should do. A national tech service, 16 to 18, with an apprenticeship tied in, and then they can go wherever they want. And at 21, those graduates who don't get a job or are not succeeding, give them a job in that local place with that local public sector organization. For 2 years, give them that guarantee. Trust me, they'll be on their way.
Thank you, Mo. Vicky, do you want to come in on the caring responsibilities question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's something here about, this isn't just about economics, it's about wasted potential, it's about fractured futures, it's about it's about whole disappointment and the human cost of exclusion, which is not sustainable. So we need to find ways to help people to learn how to learn, but to learn in a way that suits the lifestyle and the commitments and the pulls on their time, whether that is modular, flexible ways of learning, but so we can build incrementally. It's really important. But I think the crux of it is enabling people to learn how to learn so they can continue to kind of engaging in their learning throughout, so it doesn't become piecemeal. It isn't just a tick box where I do this and move on. The one thing, that requires an inspirational teacher who knows their craft as well as their teaching and their pedagogy. Societally, I'd say we need a shift in communities, in society, that recognises and values the jobs that people do in communities over the high-paid jobs.
Thank you. That brings us to the hour, and we must leave it there. So that leaves me to say that we will carry on the conversation here at the RSA. Thank you very much to our wonderful panellists this evening, to Mo, to Vicky, and to Jade. Thank you very much.